actually. So I'm happy here to have this discussion with you all about first the definition of power, what power is, where do we see it, and how do we leverage, use, and share power in our coalitions. So happy to have you all here this morning. Lisa.
I'll do a Zoom 101. This is also, I like to think of it as power sharing, right? We don't want to assume that everyone knows what we already know. And so think of, setting the baseline as a way to share power or knowledge. So we will be using some advanced functions in Zoom, particularly the annotate function, which we will be using. So if you go to the top of your screen, it will say you are viewing Paula Giraldo's screen. And if you click on those three dots, you can click annotate. So that is one thing we will be using. Um, and you are welcome to use the chat to engage with us as well. And let's see, I think there's a few more slides that go into this. So you can advance to the next one, Paula. If you are having an issue joining and hearing everything, yes, cat test, it is working. I love that. You can join by audio and you click on the bottom right of your microphone and hit the little caret and you can click join by switch to phone audio and it will mirror your video and your audio, but it won't duplicate. Um, and then the last thing is Zoom breakout rooms. So we will be doing self-selected breakout rooms for part of it. So we welcome you all to select or tell us which one you want to go to if you're not able to do that. I also have a new Zoom function. I see someone has a note taker that wants to join, and we are not allowed to admit like AI note taking. So I'm not sure if anyone here, it says it's Isabel's AI note taker. And does that belong to anyone? So I just want to let you know, unfortunately, we are not allowed because we need to provide all party consent to record and transcribe a meeting, and Otter does not provide that. So um sorry about that. We can transcribe it though using Zoom and we are recording. So hopefully that will be sufficient. Any questions? Okay, let's dig in then into our agenda. Um, so we're going to do a little icebreaker and then we'll give a definition of power. We'll talk about different dimensions of power, right? So how does power show up? Um, we want you all to do a power mapping activity. Oftentimes we really don't think of power. It's just kind of something that's there, but we don't think about it. We don't name it. And in coalitions, that can be quite um, counterproductive. And then we want you all to think about how to leverage power to engage folks in your coalitions. So that's how we're going to spend the next 3 hours. We'll be here until 1. There will be a break to help you all. It'll be around I don't actually remember exactly what time, but about at the halfway point. But feel free to take care of yourselves in the interim. And let me just share the learning objectives. We want to define power and explore its role in public health, how it can influence relationships and experiences within our community, identify the value of lived experience and systemic dynamics of power and oppression, right? So what are, oftentimes we hold value to very specific things like a degree, or a connection or a network, and we don't often value lived experience. And then we want to gain strategies to collectively build power. So those are our objectives today. And our group agreements. We'd love for you all to stay present and engaged. I love seeing folks on cameras. I really appreciate it. And I also know that some of you are trying to listen in and multitask, and that's okay too. Um, we want you all, if you're comfortable speaking, we want to hear you. If you're less comfortable, we'd love to hear from you and have others make space for you. Um, would love for you all to take care of yourselves in this time. This is PD time for you, and you've carved it out. So do what you need to do. Grace and patience for us, grace and patience for each other. Um, hopefully tech won't derail anything today, but you never know. Um, this is a brave space. I think power is a pretty interesting topic, and to really dig in, we encourage you all to be vulnerable. Um, any things folks would like to add? Can I get a virtual or physical thumbs up from folks if you're good with these? Oh, thank you, Winston. That's 2 thumbs up. Great. Thank you. Um, okay. So this would not be a CHTI training if we didn't do breakout rooms and if we didn't do icebreakers. I think for those of you who have been here with us long enough, you know that. I would love for you all, we're going to go in breakout rooms for about, I think, 10 minutes. Yeah. And please share your name, your pronouns, your organization or coalition, job title, community and location, and one thing you enjoy doing outside of work. Perhaps it could be winter related. We did that in an icebreaker yesterday. And that was very funny. Snowshoeing made it on the list, which I was quite impressed by. So you all will have 10 minutes. Thank you, Paula, for putting that in the chat. You all will be whisked to breakout rooms, and we will see you back at 10:25. All right, Winston, I think I'm passing it to you.
Well, does anyone want to share any interesting things that they're doing outside of work? What was the coolest thing we heard? Anyone snowshoeing? No? No one wants to share the coolest thing they heard? Did they hear anything cool? Is anyone, cutting down their own tree? I've been watching Christmas movies on Netflix. I didn't know that was a thing.
I talked about snowshoeing in my group. Like when we go to my uncle's in New Hampshire, we usually try and do a little snowshoeing.
All right, all right. Dora, how far do you go in snowshoes? Is that miles?
How far do I go versus how far my uncle goes? No, I will do a little bit just as it's pretty, and then I was saying that I prefer the warm cup of tea, watching, everybody else do the snowshoeing.
Dora, Elisa in the chat says she forgot to mention polar plunge. You forgot. Wait, you said that as if you do that repeatedly. Like it's not just one plunge, it's many plunges over the winter. All right. Kudos, kudos. Anyone else? Every week. Wow. Okay.
Wait, we're gonna have to have a side chat about this. I'm very curious. I know it's a thing now, and I'm so yes, okay. Anyway.
Polar plunge side chat when we go to the break. If you'd like to stay.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. All right. Snowshoeing and polar plunging for anyone who's not tried. That is commitment. Thank you. All right. So before we start our conversation about power, and we're going to spend some time here in the beginning, sort of discussing the definition of power and where we see it showing up. I think oftentimes when we have these conversations in these sessions and other sessions where we talk about coalitions and coalition construction and mission building is we know the words, maybe we know the definitions, but we're not as good as seeing it in real time, right? Seeing how power dynamics are playing out. Sometimes seeing where we stand in the power structure, right? Times when we are leaders, times when we are followers, times where we have power, times we need to share it. So I want to ask everyone, and you can drop it in the chat or raise your hand and we'll just call on you here in the Zoom. Why does your organization exist? And if not an organization, maybe it's a working group, maybe it's a commission, a task force, an alliance, a council. The folks that you are with that brought you here, why does it exist? What's its mission? Raise your hand, drop it in the chat after moments of deep consideration. Thank you, Viviana. Food security, improving food systems. Mission to stop food insecurity. Kathy, the power of community at Haley House. Love Haley House. Dora, we are Community Action Council. Lisa, we're creating a just and resilient local food and farming system while also addressing climate change. Thank you. From Kat, to improve health, well-being, and equity amongst youth in Franklin County, the North Quabbin region. Thank you, Kat. Lance, pool resources and networks to improve immigrant health across cultural groups. Thank you, Lance. And Catherine, change lives and help those in need. Yes, Cheryl, Austin Brighton Health Collaborative. I grew up in Austin Brighton. Group of 40 plus civic organizations that share information, improve our communities. SMAR, BPHC, our partners, work in partnership with communities to protect and promote the health and well-being of all Boston residents, especially those impacted by racism and systemic inequities. From Denise, found the translation exists intersection of two social dilemmas, economic disadvantages, particularly those faced by women of color, speakers of other languages, racial, ethnic, and linguistic disparities in health. Yeah. We probably won't have time to go through all of these, but thank you everyone for sharing as much as you did. From Liz, promote personal and environmental health. From Carol, trying to help new Americans become healthy, happy, successful citizens. From, I believe, please tell me if I'm pronouncing this wrong, from, is it Belkis?
Yes, Belkis.
Thank you. Empowering individual families with skills and knowledge for healthier eating and overall well-being. These are all great and fantastic missions. So I want to ask you all, we're going to talk about power. Why would this be the first question? Why would this be the first question? Why would this be the first part of our framing? Any thoughts why we'd start here as to why our coalitions exist? SMAR, help level set. Yeah, understand the context. Mission kind of defines who you're working with and for. Power needs to align with mission and to have a clear mission or starting point. All of those are exactly right. Right. And in the times in which we set the missions for our organizations, when we set the missions for our work, when we decide to be in these caring spaces, how does this align with power? Even if some of our missions are to push against existing power structures, how do we reframe and reset and understand our ever evolving relationship with power? If we start as a community organizing coalition and we are trying to push against power, what happens when we gain power? How do we reset to our mission? How do we share power as well with the folks who are in our coalitions as our power structures start to kind of coalesce, right, and build? So in that, let's move to the next slide and let's talk about what power is, sort of a definition. You can go to the next one, Paul. So what is power? I will read this first quote here. Power can be defined as a degree of control over material, human, intellectual, and financial resources exercised by different sections of society. The control of these resources becomes a source of individual and social power. That is from Van Cleason and Miller at the nonprofit online news journal. As well as power is dynamic, relational, and multidimensional, changing according to the context, circumstance, and interests. Its forms can range from domination and resistance to collaboration and transformation. How do we feel about those definitions? Are those in line with how we see power? Are there things that stick out to us that may be against our idea of power? Is there anything that adds to our idea of power here in these two definitions? Drop in the chat if you want to just come off mute, enter your voice into the space. on these definitions and how we interpret them, especially regarding our work? So you all know Lisa and I have the patience of third grade teachers, and we will wait you out.
I like the second definition that it's dynamic. It's changing. It changes, to your point earlier, Winston.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. I think that's the point that sticks out to me as well, is where folks can sit in relation to power depending on the context, right? Depending on who we are, if we're in a space and we're leading, or we get to a certain spaces where we are now powerless or less powerful and we have to follow or listen. From Madeline in the chat, political or professional ambitions aren't as explicitly named in the definition, but they're implied. I'd agree with that, Madeline. Thank you. From Mark, and power have levels like structural versus interpersonal, etc. I believe so. I believe that goes into the parts of our context of where we sit in relation to power. Do any of these definitions fit our own personal understanding of power, or how do we see power individually? Yourself, maybe perhaps in your work versus how your personal life. Alexandria, power can be gained and lost depending on your identity. Absolutely. Alexandria, is there anything you'd like to add on that? Could you add more to that? Like any specific pieces of identity you're thinking that come with more power versus less?
Yeah, so I think for me, I'm in a very unique position. So I'm at the Boston Public Health Commission and I work on the HIV services team there. And so I'm also the only Black woman on my team, right? So the power dynamic sometimes can be different because I'm also a little bit younger than the people that I may serve in the community. So in some spaces, like if we're talking about identity structure, yeah, I help fund HIV services. However, with some people, they might see me as a young lady, right? So depending on the space that I occupy and how I navigate throughout the world, sometimes I'm the most powerful person there, and at other times I'm actually not. So that's just how I think about it. And also in terms of just like education level, because sometimes it matters and other times, let's be honest, it does not even matter, right? We're talking about the character of the person. So yeah.
Thank you, Alexandra. You put a lot of pieces there, right? So 4 main things I heard you talk about: gender, racial identity, age, immediately, right? Being a person of maybe the powerful position, or maybe younger than the folks that are around you. To be the only woman in a space, especially the only Black woman in a space. Sometimes that may be empowering, other times much less so. And then age, right? That is one of the key things we talk about in a lot of our trainings, is the power that comes with experience, have been around a long time, and the disempowerment that comes with being newer, with being early into a practice as well. So thank you for that. Other thoughts on our own personal definition of power, or where we see it executed in our work? Go ahead, Lisa. I can't hear you. Still can't hear you. Keep trying. All right, Jan, I believe there's a lot of power in relationships, and that isn't always acknowledged in the work setting. Jen, would you mind elaborating a little bit on that?
Sure. I think like, so that first definition was about control of resources and all that kind of stuff. And in my experience in the work setting where there is a lot of control, like especially from like the leadership, and like folks with lived experience have no control, the relationship I think is like super important and not acknowledged. Like it's not like you can say like, yeah, I'm doing a really good job because I have this breadth and depth of relationship with the people that we work with, but it's not seen as like really something that's, I think, beneficial. As a matter of fact, I think it can be tried to be controlled.
Absolutely. I think that first quote about resources is an important way to think about power. because oftentimes there are folks who will say, I don't have power, and say, well, you have the ability to have certain resources, and there are certain things that do not impact you the way it impacts others, right? They can be an implied and given version of power in certain circumstances. From Liz, power in language and terminology, where the lack of translation or interpretation, or speaking in acronyms and not defining them. Absolutely. Sort of that internal power of structure and understood language. Just to go to the simplest form, if you've ever jumped on a call and just heard a lot of jargon and acronyms, very much outside, right? And that can be a form of shared language as well, before we get to the power of being in an English-speaking place where, our main language is picked up by so many others, where they are coming to us and learning our language and learning how to share and communicate with us, where we don't always have to do the same, right? Kathy, we can't save the world, but the power of believing in someone can mean the world to them and move mountains with hope and love. Thank you, Kathy. Absolutely, power of belief. Sometimes the power or presumptions of power that can come with seniority can be a slippery slope in an organization. Thank you, Dora. And from Samara, if you guys want to click that later as a link, we always encourage all of you, anyone in our trainings, to network and share information as well. Thank you, Samara, for sharing that grant opportunity. Okay, so let's go on to the next slide and really start to define some of these elements of power that you all have just named, right, in this definition, right? So what are the dimensions of power? Where do we see it? Where do we have it pop up in our lives, even if we cannot see it in some of the aspects that we've just shared? Let me read this last one from Belkis. Power is a powerful concept, but it can often be misunderstood or misused. However, when directed toward positive action, power becomes a force to drive change, achieve goals, and make a meaningful impact. Using power in the right way is crucial for creative positive outcomes and avoiding the negative consequences of misdirected or harmful use. Harnessed wisely, power can truly be transformative. Thank you, Belkis. That's beautifully written. Thank you. All right, so our dimensions of power, right? What are the three spaces where we can see power, or power can be allocated, or power can be used? Can I get someone to just read that first version, the first one, visible power? Just read what goes under it, and then those 2 bullet points.
I can read it. Hi,
Thank you.
everyone. My name is Niale. Sorry for joining late. So it says visible power, observable decision-making, elections, political parties, budgets, bylaws, coalition leadership, how are decisions made, race, gender, and class.
Thank you. How do you say your name? I'm sorry.
Niale?
Niale.
Yes.
Appreciate it. So visible power, do we all agree with that? Things that are very easy to see, observable, right? Our elections, our political parties, also our political representatives, budgets, bylaws, things that are put in, our leadership in our coalitions, as well as the leadership in our organizations, our C-suites, our executive directors, our funders, right? How are decisions made, and the ideas of race, gender, and class. Race and gender, visible. Class, oftentimes not as much, but there are understandings of class. Okay, I just want to read hidden power.
Hidden power, setting the agenda, which community concerns are the focus of policy, what identities and experiences are integrated into strategy.
Thank you, Alexandria. Yeah. Power that's not as visible. Who sets the agenda? Who decides what is important? The ability to dictate policy. What is the focus? Who is the focus? What neighborhoods? What towns? Who sets the mission? And then what identities and experiences are integrated into that strategy? Oftentimes in coalitions are the people who are going to be impacted, the ones that get to decide on the mission or the agenda and how to get there. Can I have someone read invisible power?
Invisible power, shaping meaning. How do individuals think about their place in the decision-making, impact of socialized roles and stereotypes?
Thank you. Thank you, Denise. Invisible power, shaping meaning. What we really don't see. How do individuals think about their place? And we're thinking about messaging that's being sent, right? The impact of our roles and stereotypes, the belief systems that we build, things that we are intaking in terms of information and what's being put out there. Lance, you put, I think, about school parent councils and school committees in Boston. Was that for hidden power?
Yes, yeah, I think I learned a lot about how those hidden and invisible powers work as a member of school site committees, and this. Like,
So
why are people not coming to our meetings? Why don't they participate?
So those are the questions folks were asking about parents, students, community members?
Yeah, yeah, and you had a mostly sort of white, upper middle class, sort of mid-level to executive level group of parents making decisions because they were used to making decisions that way, sitting around a table, having a dialogue in English with lots of acronyms and lots of sophisticated terms, and with good experiences in schools.
Thank you, Lance. I think that's that's an incredible example of hidden power, of not being able to look around where you are and say, are our practices exclusionary, right? Even whether intentional or not, have we actually made it a space where we're sharing power with folks? And that question of, I think, from what you all put in the chat about your coalitions and the work you do, it seems that many of you have heard that question of why aren't they showing up, right? Why aren't folks coming here to tell us their opinions and exercise their advocacy and feel enfranchised? And we put that on the folks who don't feel empowered. We say, why aren't they here? Well, did you invite them? Did you make it comfortable for them to be here? Did you make it clear that you were about sharing power, and in some of that sharing of the power, giving up some of yours, or the acceptance of, I have, perhaps some economic, educational, structural advantages and power, and I can name it, and also be able to open that up and see where folks do not feel the same as I do, or the spaces that I take for granted. I think that's a big part of the hidden power. Madeline, with timing of meetings, language capacity, communications, always big determinants. So a lot of things you all are naming here, we're going to put into our next activity, but I want to hear more from folks. When you hear these definitions, these three pieces, do you agree? Does it sort of connect to what you've seen in your work, personally, professionally, what you've read, what you see play out for others, where you may not be as connected? Do we agree with some of these definitions and examples of visible power, hidden power, invisible power? Or is there anything that's missing here? Let me just read Denise's follow-up here. Shameless plug. Language access is what we do at Found in Translation. I know this isn't the only barrier in getting communities at the table in different settings, but I'd be happy to talk to anybody about language. Thank you, Denise. I think the language access is incredibly important. Having done some work in school committees and superintendents, just the idea of the messages and pieces that are sent out and who is welcome and how many people feel that they will actually be heard, that your communication is being heard and understood, that people are being considered at all, is an incredible piece. So thank you, Denise. And please, everyone connect with Denise and Found in Translation.
I think sometimes hidden power is the place where there could be some change happening in power sharing, because we may have, I work at Mass Department of Public Health with the Tobacco Cessation and Prevention Program, and we have funding obligations, we have CDC obligations, and that we pass on, we have obligations, they give us money to do stuff. But that hidden power, sharing the agenda, getting input on how those metrics are met, that's where there's, I think, some wiggle room where you can work on getting that balance or that power sharing. Because if it's a broad metric, yeah, we can meet it, but there's 1,000 ways that could be met. So I think that's sometimes where there can be movement.
Thank you, Mary. Mary's saying that the hidden power is a space where there's a lot of opportunity for change there. From Carol, hidden power is often insidious. Liz, invisible power, decisions made behind the scenes, supposed engagement by people who would be served by the decision. Lance, the assumption that people who run small direct service and advocacy organizations have time to go to many coalitions, meetings, trainings, participate in research. I think, Lance, what I've heard folks talking about the meetings is just the general structure about how we communicate. There is, the idea of get to a meeting, get to this, have this time, and that does not work for all people, particularly we're talking about being mission driven and finding power. So I want to go a little deeper into sort of naming and illustrating these examples of power. So you see on this slide, we're all going to sort of annotate and brainstorm together, and we're going to do this a few times, spaces where we see these labels of power. So if you go to the top of your screen, you should see where it says that Paulette is sharing her screen. You'll see three little dots to the right. If you click and see the annotate, once you hit annotate, there will be a toolbar that will pop up either on the left side of your screen or the top. I'm going to ask all of you to click the big T on my screen. It is blue, or it's in a blue box. You click that T and you'll be able to write in text. Then you can click on the slide that is being shown on your screen. And I want all of us to start writing examples of visible power. We'll sort of debrief all of these examples and where we see them and if we agree. And then later we will take all of this and also add it to the PowerPoint for when we share this back with all of you, all of this information, so you can refer to it later. So let's take 3 to 4 minutes, hit our annotate, hit that text button, and start to write all the spaces where we see visible power, right? The places where it's observable decision-making.
Kathy says money also.
Money, wealth.
I would also say, or I was trying to say before, is that, if you're not thinking a lot about power, it probably means that you have a significant amount, right? So if we're not really thinking about it, it's because we don't need to, because we likely don't feel that disempowered. So like as a person in a senior level at my organization, I don't think a lot about power, but I bet the people I supervise think a lot about power, right? So that's my own privilege, that if I don't bring my own awareness to it, then it becomes hidden or invisible. So.
Just to read a few of the folks with control of funding, absolutely. The board of directors, meaning the makeup of power, and who gets to set that decision, absolutely. Executive directors and board of directors, size of an office. When I read that, I'm thinking of the idea of the higher you get in an organization, the bigger your office becomes. So we have this physical representation of power, length of employment, jargon, who's invited to meetings to address, absolutely, chain of command in communications. I don't know who wrote that, but could you add more to that in the chat? Maybe I'll come off mute. I'm thinking that means to me that the person at the top is not spoken to by many people and that they filter the information through others, that there isn't a lot of direct communication in terms of power and leadership. Please let me know if I'm thinking about that wrong. Special parking spots, right? You get that promotion, you get to that big office, you also get that parking spot up front. All of these public exhibitions of power and success, access to professional development, windows in an office. That's such a small but important piece, right? That's just things that I have that others do not. Things like windows. Salary, absolutely. Who's invited to address power meetings and speak to power? Certainly. Funders, yes. So we will take these and we'll make bullet points. We're going to clear these right now, so I want to be mindful of time and get to a few of our other spaces so that we can brainstorm those as well. We're going to brainstorm kind of going into our break, and then we're going to come back and pivot using some of these brainstorm topics that you all have shared. So Paul, if you want to clear that and bring us to the hidden power. Great. Let me just get to what folks have shared in the chat here.
Sorry.
No
Give me
problem.
2 seconds, sorry.
Ms. Mara, besides not thinking about power, also do you feel uncomfortable with the power? Thank you, Samar. For Madeline, directors filter all information. We cannot email people across departments without asking permission. Thank you, Madeline. That would absolutely be that's a great example of power and the weaponization of power as well. And from Belkis, not allowing staff to grow professionally. We're seeing you in the chat now, Belkis. I'm not sure what may have happened there. All right, so same kind of exercise on your annotate again, but now we're going to talk about places where we have the hidden power, the ability to set the agenda, right? And in there, we're thinking about things like funders, folks who everyone may not know, but through money, funders and investors, folks with capital that have the ability to set our agendas, what we talk about in terms of policy, public and private. Legal status, that is an outstanding example and not one that I think I've seen folks write before, right? That is an incredible amount of hidden power. Determining goals without input, priority setting behind closed doors. So setting an agenda and priorities without input with only, I'm assuming that's with a select group of people, and who selects that group? Insurance companies. You know, given what's happened in the last 2 weeks, I'm not going to get too much into that one, but determining goals without input, lived experience. I'm just gonna ask the person who dropped lived experience if you wouldn't mind elaborating on that, either vocally or in the chat. The hidden power with lived experience.
That was me.
Hey, Dora.
Hey. Yeah, so I just think that there's, you know, like we do so much of this, like, you know, degrees and, you know, whatever, like, but I live with, or I work with low-income families, and there's just so much power to the lived experience, you know what I mean? And I do also coaching and things like that, and they don't give each other like the credit they deserve, or themselves the credit they deserve for what they've been through, and also like how much harnessing of that power they can do to sort of like move forward, and not just move themselves forward, but move like change forward in terms of like, you know, our mission or our organization, or what I can do, you know, in my capacity as a case management coordinator, you know, so really just trying to harness that. And I think there's hidden power in it, but I think that it can often be squashed by, I don't have enough degree, I don't have enough education, I don't have enough this, or, you know, I didn't come from money, or, you know, those kinds of things. And so there is just a lot of hidden power to it.
I'm hearing you name two things there, right? The power of our lived experience and what we've seen and what we've been through, and then the power of those to the power to downplay lived experience and go for educational experience and degrees and different, you know, sort of pivot points of achievement, and say that that is what's more important than lived lifetime experience, being on the ground and having in-depth knowledge of the mission. So thank you, Dora.
Absolutely.
Survival skills, creativity, resourcefulness. Thank you, Lance. I'm seeing here small group strategic planning, building relationships to determine outcomes instead of for hidden power. Intersectionality, certainly. I would like to hear more about the intersectionality piece in the chat if folks wouldn't mind. The accounting office, non-inclusive budgeting processes, i.e. only a few people decide where the money is allocated. Absolutely. Setting the agenda, being in the hands of so few. I think that's sort of the theme of this piece in hidden power. Is hidden power is power by the few, right? Not clear, not transparent, power by the few. Thank you, Paula. If you want to just get us a copy of that, and we'll make it into bullet points and keep that for our distribution at the end. Kat, no problem. Hope you can rejoin us. And now we will talk about invisible power, shaping the meaning. What are the examples of folks shaping the meaning? And invisible power, we're thinking of messaging, right? Things that we get that we may not think or see have power. And that could be messaging around stereotypes. There's a great book I always recommend to folks in our training. It's called Whistling Vivaldi. It's a book about the impact of stereotype and stereotype threat. Then when stereotypes are entered into the lives of young students, how it affects their performance. You know, that's things like who are their teachers, their gender, how it plays into what they do, how it plays into their visions of success, if they've seen versions of success. So that's what I think of an invisible power, right? Who do we see in leadership, right? What are the messages we get? Things like stereotypes, whether they are jokes or, Jen, it is Whistling Vivaldi. I believe the author is Claude Steele, but let me make sure. I'll grab that for you.
Winston, I got it. You keep going. I'll put it in the chat.
Thank you, Lisa. But it's a fantastic book. And you know, I'll raise my hand for saying that audiobooks are reading. And so if you don't have the time or you're on the road and you can't get that book in your hand, go ahead and listen to that audiobook. The information is what's important. Thank you, Belka. Saying things to you in a way that diminishes your worth or self-esteem. Absolutely. And that's the pieces we're getting to in terms of bias and stereotypes, right? Things that we say that may undermine people, or things that we exhibit in our organizations that make it clear, right? If we say that we care about, let's say, because this has been a hot topic, we care about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but our leadership is one type of focus, right? And there is no space for any other voices to be in the space. Thank you, Lisa. Invisible power, telling youth they are the future rather than sharing power. Absolutely. Messaging versus execution, right? Choice of language. And then what are all the isms and phobias? How this influences things? Homophobia, sexism, racism. Absolutely. And I think we have a great, we've had a lot of discussions around folks who say some of these isms are not visible, they're not clear, but they are within our policy, right? They are within our messaging. They are within our media. And we have so many versions of media now, right? We have our old school television, we have our streaming services, we have our social media. And that's another part of our invisible power in shaping meaning. I won't get too much into our election, but I think one of the discussions that are at the end of our election was, should the candidates go on podcasts? Which podcasts have which audience? What do those audiences believe, right? And that is a version of invisible power in shaping meaning. The places where our political candidates go to display their messages and what is sent to those audiences. Influence of history. Absolutely. The power of our history and how it plays forward and our understanding of that, an invisible power. Refusal to collect or use data. Whoever dropped that, because you add more to that in the chat, or you can come off mute if you don't mind. Privilege. Privilege, whether you think you have it or you don't, right? I can say, as a Black man, to go back to the points of intersectionality, I have the privilege of being a man, and I have the underprivileged identity of a Black man. Both of those things can be true. Surveillance technologies, certainly. You know, we all have this thing, right, in our hands. Others that we would add. I think this is a great list. Lisa, I'm just going to go into the next one so we can go into the break. So our last piece, and you all have done a great job of listing these things out, and it's a good discussion about power and the way power looks. And now I want us to get into the barrier busting. We've named these versions of power. We've gone through the definition of power. And Paul, if you want to jump ahead to the barrier busting, now I want us to, and this is what we're going to talk about when we come back from our break. We're going to go into breakout groups. We're going to pull out some themes here. And in the breakout groups, we're going to talk about in those breakout groups, how do we actually get past these barriers? So I want everyone, jump onto this in the annotate function or drop it in the chat. What are the barriers to sharing power? What makes it hard to fight against a power structure, right? What are the barriers you're having, the struggles you're having in sharing power, gaining power, having power be adaptable and in service to your mission that we named early on? What are the hardest pieces of power? Fear. Thank you, Liz. Liz, I'm gonna drop that one on the annotate for you. I'm gonna write that in for you. Thank you, Liz. Allies are not true allies. I'm gonna put that as authenticity. For person who dropped employment, is that saying to push against power may cost you a job or a role or salary? You can come off mute and share the answer to that or drop it in the chat.
Yes, that's me. Yeah, if you do something within an organization that leadership does not like, because you're trying to create voice for somebody, you're at risk of your employment. I also personally experienced employment as a barrier when I was doing some advocacy with some residents. We have seen firsthand how the marijuana industry and just marijuana in general has impacted our family. So we stood up and said we don't want marijuana retail in our neighborhoods. And so a lot of us, at least 3 of us, got calls from an elected official at our workplace to try to get verification about, is this person speaking for themselves or are they speaking for you? So it was a form of intimidation. So again, the employment can be an intimidation tactic.
Thank you, Viviana. Thank you for sharing that story. Pushing back against power and a not so subtle threat on impacting a person's life if they do not go along. Thank you for sharing that. Insecurity, reactiveness, pushback, structural, reflecting larger society, not just in a given organization, isms, intersectionality, positions in rank, personal attacks. Allies are not true allies, is how things are done. Tradition. Does anyone feel sometimes speaking against, you just feel you don't want to be different, right? It's just easier to kind of go along with it sometimes, right? You know, I'm thinking of Viviana's point and not going to the policy piece, but if I'm in a neighborhood and a community and most people, even with friends, they want to do something and I'm against it, sometimes it's hard to be the person that says, I don't think this is a good idea, right? And there is power in some of the hidden power of the group, right? Power of your circle, power of the people who are at the table with you. And can you speak against them? Folks that you are in coalition with, folks that you are in community with. Can you disagree? And there is power in that, the power of consensus. I want to bring up a few things from the chat. Fear from Liz, from Elisa, can't access funding. Donors will pull their funding. You know, just had someone leave the chat for a little bit to go and write a grant, right? There's power in grants. There's power in how the money's being distributed. You having to sell yourself, writing your grants, right? So in this ever perfect language in the hopes of grabbing that money. From Alexandria, groupthink is dangerous. Absolutely dangerous. Absolutely. Jen, if you push back, you often get penalized in different ways. You get penalized. Sometimes you get labeled. You know, you're not a team player. You're not the brand of the organization or the coalition. You are not the face or the person that becomes the one who should be in leadership. Or, you know, the phrase we hear a lot, you don't have buy-in. How do we get you to buy in, right? Belkis, fear also plays a major role, as someone mentioned, fear of losing your position or being perceived as someone who is always playing the race card when addressing the unequal treatment. Absolutely. That is the labeling, that is the stigmatizing folks who push back against power. Dora, I think sometimes it's exhausting and you feel defeated to go against the current, even when you feel strongly about it, because the space may not be welcoming to new ideas and suggestions. Absolutely. Putting together Belkis' statement and Dora's statement, when you're the person that pushes back a lot and you receive that label, the fatigue that comes with that. And eventually you say, I'm tired. I don't have a lot of support. Does it become worth it? And that fatigue and wearing down is incredibly important when we think about power in our coalitions and how do we share power and how do we care for the folks that are in our coalitions. At least I had a major funder stop funding my organization because he didn't like the activism I was doing outside of work on police abolition. Thank you, Elisa. Your personal impacting the professional, and the power of through money, through financial coercion of someone to say what you're doing personally, there'll be backlash against your organization. Okay. Thank you all for that. So we're going to take these barrier busting points that you all have shared here. We're going to sort of distill them down into 4 or 5 main topics. And when we come back from our break, we'll be in breakout groups, really kind of brainstorming and leaning on the power and experience of the folks in the group here to think about the ways that we push back against these barriers, right? And some of the fatigue that comes with this continuous fighting to reshape and rethink power. Anything anyone would like to share before we go into our break? Anything that's coming up for anyone, ideas, thoughts, things that we may not have said or shared yet, things that we want to elaborate on. I shouldn't have said break. When everyone heard break, they were like, if I talk, it's more time before we go to break. So lesson learned.
I have one thing that I love to talk about at some point, which is how we don't have control over different aspects of our work and the things that we do because they're mandated by law or whatever. So our hands get tied. So just an example being the state of Massachusetts and federal law mandates that we have a board of directors that looks like this and that has this kind of power. And that's not always a structure or power that serves our organization well, but our hands are tied because there are laws around these things that mandate and dictate, structures. And so anyway, I've been struggling with that as an executive director of an organization, how you can subtly kind of push back against things that are mandated by law that are set up for you structurally in ways that control how much you can do things or how you can do things.
Pushing back against embedded policies. I think that's a discussion we have often in terms of folks saying this is legal, this is not. Things are legal or illegal until they're not. Until we change policies and preferences. Just to Viviana's point, 2 years ago, marijuana was illegal. And it was, if you were smoking, vaping, it was unseemly. And now it is a daily occurrence and accepted, whether folks want it or not. But thank you for that. So let's go to break. Let's take 10 minutes. We're at 11:15. Let's come back together at 11:25. All right, thumbs up. It's good. You can turn your screens off. We will see you at 11:25. Thank you, everyone.
So what we want to do is we want to take the themes that emerged from our conversation earlier, and we will let you all self-select into a breakout room in the following 4 themes. So this is what we identified: fear, backlash, and discomfort as a challenge to power sharing, right? That was one thing that came up. Policies and systems that are in place as another challenge that came up. Acknowledging power, whether it is discomfort with acknowledging power or a lack of awareness of one's own power. And then the power of our own identities, right? So a lot of you talked about, well, in this space, I do feel powerful with this identity, and in this space, I don't. Or in terms of the coalitions that you all engage, how might power of identity come into play? So we will talk about those. There are 4 groups and 4 slides. And so we will have you all take notes, please. You don't need to use the annotate function, but each group should take notes and be ready to report back. And what we want you to know is, or think about, is how has this issue shown up for you, either in your organization or in your work, and how was it addressed? Or if it hasn't been addressed, which is likely, how can it be addressed, right? So in terms of fear, backlash, and discomfort, you know, in a hiring process or in a supervisory relationship, we had issues with this. And what we did, for example, was we created a much more robust way to quietly or anonymously complain about an issue that was happening, particularly for our transgender staff, because that was an issue that kept coming up. And so our organization addressed that systemic power imbalance by trying to create more avenues for reporting that felt safer. So that might be an example. So you all might have examples, or you might have ideas for what could be different, right? Maybe it hasn't happened, but what are ideas? So you all can self-select, and those breakout rooms should, if you click on the join breakout room at the bottom, if you are unable to do that because you are on your phone, you can put it in the chat and we will move you there ourselves. So if you click on join breakout room at the bottom right of your screen, it will have all of those options and you can join. Any questions about that? Okay, so you all have 10 minutes. Please choose a note taker / reporter. And you are free to go and you can move around. Consider this like a space that you can move in. So report again. Welcome back. For the group who went into the fear, backlash, discomfort, would love to hear from your reporter backer about what you brainstormed. What are some solutions to this challenge? What are some practices you all can use going forward or have used with success?
Oh, we were supposed to talk about solutions? We didn't
Maybe. I mean, if it ended up being
there.
just a bitch session, oops, sorry, then that's okay too.
So I think we mostly were trying to just establish where we are, where we have been, and not necessarily work on solutions yet. So I think a couple of people talked about being either new to or part of a very large healthcare organization and feeling like speaking up for community or even for oneself is difficult, if not futile, because you don't know if your voice is really being heard by anyone. And a couple people talked about it's hard to speak up when you don't know who your allies are, or you know who will shoot you down if you do speak up. And I think a couple of people really talked about this tension of being in an organization with a great mission, but may not be exactly what they're doing in the world, and trying to speak up for one's community needs. And one person in particular talked about fear of being powerless, undocumented, a woman of color, speaking, always called on to speak for community needs, and not really sure how the audience is positioned to respond to that, and whether they value the lived experience of people in the community. So hopefully I did a good job of summarizing those, but
Does anyone want to add? That's wonderful. Okay, Dora's giving you claps. I would love to hear if folks, these are really good issues that have been brought up. Have they been addressed in any way, or is there any way to address it? I I think of one example, but it's very much on the individual level, which is for those of us with power or with privilege to be comfortable in the discomfort of being unpopular or having um, a problematic or annoying opinion, right? So, oftentimes we are careful and have reasons to be, but if we have identities that give us privilege or power situationally, I would say it's important to be comfortable in that. And I can say from personal experience, I am deeply, deeply uncomfortable giving feedback to people in power. I do not like to do it. I grew up in a Middle Eastern household. There was a lot of concepts of deferential, just being deferential to people with very specific identities. And so unlearning that is a huge challenge for me. And so some of you might have to do some very deep work in that to be comfortable with that. Samara, let's see what you said. I learned that being unpopular or separate from the group can make overwhelm in our nervous systems as it is ingrained to be safe as a survival skill. Yeah, Samara. So what would a antidote to that be, do you think?
Maybe awareness, or maybe that's the start. Because if you're aware that that might happen in your nervous system, like a fight, flight, fawn response is gonna come up. And like knowing that before you step into whatever space, place you want to, like you want to. So you're like, I'm choosing to dysregulate my nervous system because this has a greater meaning to me than my nervous system's response. So if you're aware of it, maybe you can just like be really kind to yourself as you go through all that stuff, fast heart rate and all the fear and response and sweaty palms and feelings afterwards and all of it, being like, but I did that for a reason, so that you can like self-talk yourself through the process, knowing that like the nervous system response is just going to come along and doesn't mean you actually did something wrong or that you are actually unsafe. Although I want to give a huge nod to it is unsafe at times, I think, in terms of being fearful that you could lose your job or not get the promotion or other things that you might literally need to take care of yourself or your family. So there's that balance that we have to keep, I guess, or question mark to the group about that last part.
Thank you, Samara. I think those are really very excellent points around being aware. And I love that, Jen. I was just going to say the same thing. Talking with others about that process so you don't feel alone and can build community, right? Like maybe it's about pushing back with a friend, right? I know we talked about allies or not knowing who your allies are. And a lot of us are pushing. Oh, you all can't hear me? Can you hear me now? Am I still very quiet? Yes.
It's better, but you were a little quiet there. I think you're good where you are.
Okay, I will like speak
Yeah.
very closely into my, okay, great. So yeah, finding your allies and figuring out who they are. And sometimes we're pushing back on Teams or on Slack or whatever, or on a text message chain, right? You want to think about like, it's not always happening in a community meeting. Sometimes this pushback is happening in real time at work. You don't have time to prepare, but you know something needs to be said because it doesn't make sense, or isn't right. And so you need to figure it out. So yes, email. Yes, an email response. And I always suggest sitting on those for 24 hours anyway. So any others before we move on to the next? Yeah, go ahead, Carol.
As I'm listening, I'm hearing and thinking of all my years working. And one of the things that has been most useful for me in the last 10 years was we have a psychiatrist on, we did have a psychiatrist on the faculty. And I learned about Dunning-Kruger. Are you all familiar with Dunning-Kruger? It is, I thought it was a joke, but it is a well-known psychological phenomenon, well diagnosed and well written about. And what it was two people that figured this out. And what they said was, what they learned was the people who think they're the smartest and the best are really the stupidest and the worst. And I always thought that was true, but then I thought it was just me thinking that. But it is a well-known phenomenon, which leads me to say that when you're confronted with somebody who comes on like, a ton of bricks and is smarter than you and knows everything, rather than listen to that, I think, are we hearing Dunning-Kruger here? And it puts it all into perspective and said, this guy may be the best and the brightest, or he may be just a big mouth and one of these people that knows how to get what he wants, or she, I shouldn't say he, what she wants from the system for herself. And that gives me a little kind of breadth of thought that I can go into this without my little fears or little insecurities or whatever. So look it up, DUNNING-KRUGER. It's wonderful. And now we used to sit in department meetings, big department meetings, the whole school thing. And somebody would say something and she would just turn to me and go, Dunning-Kruger. And then we're like, yes, I'm thinking the same thing. So it helps, I think it helps center you as a person to deal with other people that you may have a stereotype about that you don't realize, and that is making you not as functional as you could be.
And it's possible that those really dumb and horrible people have a lot of power over you. So it's both
yes.
and, right? So it's
yes.
So you can think that, and the reality can be that they still can make things difficult.
Right. But you know how to deal with them because you know what you're dealing with.
Yeah.
Easier that you don't.
So let's move on to group 2, and your barrier was policies and systems. And oh wait, there's so much in the chat. Hold on. Belkis, based on my personal experience, I found it helpful to recognize that my superiors' actions often stemmed from their own challenges. By learning to detach and not take things personally, I realized it wasn't about me, but rather about how that person in power was feeling. This mindset allowed me not to let their behavior bother me unless it directly impacted my mental well-being. So important. I knew to take action on a different scale and worked well for me. Oh, 30th anniversary. Wow. And Dora, it's tough to go against the mentality of this is the way we've always done it from people who've been there longer. Yeah, ask Winston about that. Winston, well, I've been at HRIA for 10 years and Winston's been there for 2. And yeah, that is a real struggle.
Well, I'm a rabble rouser.
You're what, Winston?
Rabble rouser, but I'm okay with it.
Yes.
I think some of the stuff I hear folks talking about in terms of power is, I think about where we sit individually. Like, are we in a position where we can risk things, right? So I can think of my own personal experience and organization I've been in. I'm in a position where I can risk things, right? If you fire me, I'm fine. If you, try to demote me, I'm going to push back, right? So I'm in a space where I feel that I can speak to power no matter what is going on, because I don't feel there's anything they can do to harm me. And it's not, not everyone feels that way, right? Or has the ability to take those kinds of risks. So how do we take calculated risks? Do we feel more comfortable taking a risk for other people, which happens a lot for us who work in caring spaces, right? We may not step out on that limb for ourselves, but if someone in our community, if a client, if a family member, if someone that we work with is in need, or they're not being heard, or they're in a space of discomfort, we often feel times we will go and stand up for someone else before ourselves. So we're the places where we feel we can take risk.
Yes. Again, power is very relative, very relational. And let's think about how that plays in with policies and systems. So for group 2, who discussed policies and systems, if you all have solutions, I'd love to go straight to those, but if you didn't get a chance, that's okay too.
We did have solutions.
Great, Denise, thank you.
I took notes so I can kind of summarize, and then other group members, please feel free to chime in if I miss anything. But we talked about policies and systems, both like at a sort of city policy level and at an organizational level. So some of the solutions related to that kind of city level, Viviana gave a really great story and anecdote and talked about realizing that city councilors and representatives are elected representatives supposed to be representing the community, kind of realizing that and realizing that, the community has power as the people who are voting those people into office. So recognizing, the power that's with the community, realizing that those elected leaders are people and they're supposed to represent the community. Samara also chimed in, noting that oftentimes the community has more knowledge and expertise on certain issues. And let's see, Jen talked about doing organizing, kind of forming those coalitions around certain issues, getting people to show up, finding people who are passionate about a cause and can speak up. And then organizationally, we talked about budgeting processes. Mary also brought up planning processes, hiring processes. And we talked about like making those processes inclusive, having more transparency. And Viviana and Jen also brought up inclusive budgeting examples at the city level in Revere and Boston.
So we lost you again. You have to lean into that microphone. Oh, still lost you. All right. While Lisa is going to work on audio, I want to follow up for a quick second on what Samara dropped in the chat. I think it's a really great point about organization, and her point of saying, how can we organize so that no one person feels risks, especially at cost of living and changes at the federal level, local levels too, right? Which will really impact people, and folks are going to feel very shaky around finances and security and safety. And I think this is something great for the group to sort of discuss in terms of when I read this initially, my first thought was, it's really hard to guarantee there'll be no risk particularly when you're talking about pushing back against legacy systems, when you're talking about pushing back against policy. And if you're talking about at the federal level, you're going to be pushing back against ideas that have just been voted in, right? So technically, you're pushing back against a majority opinion. And so I wonder how folks feel about the idea and concept and risk, and can we lessen it, or can we share it, or is there a space where we can't guarantee there won't be risk, but how do we help folks who are going to take the risk and the fallout that happens, right? That's the idea of community and protecting folks, having your own version of a safety net, whether in your organization or in your communities, whether in your friend groups or your organizing groups, or even in your C-suites. You know, I've worked at different nonprofits where we pivoted and changed based on the community, what that community needed, right? If we knew that there were folks that were going to go out and they were going to, you know, possibly have lost wages or less wages, or they were going to have issues with paying bills, that we organized to help them through these rough patches because they were going to be taking risks. And so you had a backing, right? You had a support system. And is there a way to build that, to Samara's point? Samara, pairing low power with high power to tag team risk when speaking out. Absolutely.
You
Right.
all cannot hear me. Oh, wait, am I back? Back. It's very odd. Okay, we have new computers, and I'm telling you, technology. Okay, let's move on to group 3, which was not identity, but it was power acknowledging power. So for those of you who were in that group, Elisa, I think it might be you. Okay, go ahead. Tell us what you all discussed. What solutions?
Okay, I have some notes, but my group members should definitely chime in. So one of the things that was identified is that when there was assurance of no consequences, it was much easier to name misuse and abuse of power. That what often shuts down kind of revelation of those kinds of things is that there will be consequences. One group member shared that sometimes when you're young and new to a workplace, you're unaware of power and how it functions, and that it's something that people actually need to be taught, that they need to be taught to navigate power, to identify the locus of power, but that it's also sometimes hard to learn because power is often used in subtle ways. Let's see. Another thing that we identified was the comfort of talking about power only with others who are like-minded, or those that we think might be brought along in their understanding similar to ours, but that there's a much higher stake in talking with others who don't see it the same way. Thinking about how power can be shared and lifted up to those who have less power, but always worried and curious about how that will be accepted by others. One group member talked about how in coalition work, multiple people are required. So, and if a community isn't big, it's really important to bring more people along and lift them up. That actually was part of the previous comment. And then one group member talked about setting up partnerships between youth and adults, and the struggle of trying to get adults to understand their power in that kind of relationship where there's an age differential. And that's pretty much it. And I'm sure that the other folks in my group can add and clarify.
Hear me? How about now? Can you hear? Yes. Okay. I'm so sorry. Yes. So I think this is all really wonderful, and it is a big piece of it. Like the example of adults and young people, so many of us often don't realize where we do have power. And an example of adults and young people, or even adults or, middle-aged people and elderly folks, right? So it goes in both directions, that there is a really big shift in power along age. And honestly, sometimes there's such a high connection between building trust and sharing power or acknowledging power. And a lot of ways we build trust is by acknowledging our power and being aware of it. So I really appreciate you all. I want to get it to Winston to get to a concrete activity that we are going to do on power mapping. I don't think anyone did the power of identity. I didn't see folks in that group. So we can move ahead, and I will pass it to you, Winston.
All right, so we are running a little bit short on time. I want us to go through this exercise on power mapping and sort of having a visual representation and a physical act of writing down where power lies in our organizations. So we're thinking about this. We talk about pushback and change. So you see this grid on the graph here. I want you all to make your own version of this grid. Excel, Notes app, piece of paper. Write it down. Across the top, you're going to have gender, age, race, education, ability, class, and stake, meaning how invested are the people on the left in the mission of your coalition or organization. On the left, going down, you're going to write coalition leadership, the coalition members, community we serve, and yourself. So I want you all to take, let's go 5 to 7 minutes and write out this map as it pertains to you and your organization or coalition that you are representing. And I'm here if anyone has any questions, if you want to drop in the chat or just come off mute and ask.
And maybe we could get some music for those of you who like to work with a little. Thank you.
Absolutely. Some of these will have a range. If you want to do a range for age, if you want to do a range for education, whether it's, could be undergrad and higher. Ability refers to physical abilities. In class as well, you can sort of like have you seen this.
Winston, there's a question from Liz in the chat on how you define stake.
Okay, I see that. So let's think about that in terms of high stake, low stake. Right? So meaning for the parties on the left, the mission of the organization, pieces that we said earlier, how invested are they by the impact, right? Level of impact. So if I am leading an organization that is a food bank in say a low income community that I'm not a part of, but I'm the ED. Is my stake in the mission, would I say my stake in the mission is really high? Because I'm not going to be using the food. Maybe I wasn't born in that community. I'm running the organization. Right? So I would say in a bit that my stake in that as leadership would be low. Now I want the organization to be great, but in the mission and the impact, I may not feel it as much as the community. Right? The community we serve would have a high stake. I hope that makes sense. All right, let's come back together. And we want to have a discussion about what we see in our power map. So this is really to be viewed as a self-assessment, right? A check of the work we're doing and the places we're doing this work. So I want us to discuss together here in this group for the next 10 minutes. So what we saw in our power maps, if there was anything that jumped out at us, anything we were surprised to see, anything that, things that sort of match up with how we feel in our work and on the ground, anything that was surprising or anything that may have been a little saddening. There are 4 questions. Paul, you can jump ahead to the next slide. We go through the questions. for us to consider and kind of debrief and unpack together. So one, looking at the demographic information and notice if it varies among the stakeholders. Are there differences? Where, if there are any, are there obvious power imbalances? What are the differences and or similarities you notice in the kinds of power for each stakeholder category? Those are categories on the left side. What does it say or what does it imply about the power of our leadership versus the power of the community? Where there are clear differences in where the power lies. Oh. See, Paula, now I know that's your alarm. Any differences in power and also in stake? And how does that affect our work or relationship with power and the stakeholders in each category and also the community that we serve? So, jump off mute, tell us what you saw on your power map, throw it in the chat, and we can just kind of have this open discussion together here in the big group. What did we see? Go ahead, Mary.
Emphasis on high degrees.
Meaning, and was there in one particular category or across everything?
The leaders, the decision makers, not the community members per se, but the leaders. But even it trickles down, like when you're working with your coalition, a lot of the people who can attend because of, our scheduling and all the other things we talked about tend to be the people with degrees.
Fucking college degrees, post-grad, masters, maybe PhDs. Big emphasis on degrees and leadership. I think that may be consistent for a lot of us. Anyone who came out of college in the 90s, early 2000s, like myself, has probably seen the shift in jobs and applications in terms of requirements. You need a master's degree for an entry-level job now. What does that mean for community? Go ahead, Alicia.
Hi, yes. Well, I saw as we lead, the affected community members lead the organization, like are the voices, and then that's how we lead, and also are the ones that like we do have people that are also have education that have been educated, but the voices are, or the leaders are the people who has been affected by anything. It could be health, it could be education, it could be anything. But they are the ones who speak in and who are saying where we going and how do we do it. Also, we also are the ones that are coming from the same neighborhoods. We live in the same place. We know our struggles. We know what it is. We have our same pain, and we were so passionate about it because we live here, and we do want those changes because we do know that we want our children to live in a better place, and to have all these things, and we want to be included as community members. So yeah.
Alicia, could you share a bit more about your organization and maybe a little bit more about how you've been able to keep the community members at the front of leadership? Is that in the mission? Is that something that's developed over time? As best you can.
Yes. I'll put my camera on. So my name is I'm Alicia, and I'm from Mujeres Victoriosas in New Bedford, Massachusetts. So pretty much it's an organization about women, and we do we bring in men, their the husbands and everything else. One of the things that we do, we talked about empowering women, educating women, talking about what it's important for them, and having a voice in New Bedford and also in Massachusetts itself. Previously I talked about fear and what happens when it's been a system that has been place for many years, and then we come here and we say, well, you know, I've been living here and this is not working for us. Can we start changing? And then it brings a lot of fear, but we have to speak up. And one of the things that we do is we do have a leadership. We do talk about things like that. We have programs where we not that we want to say train, but we do talk about organizing and the ability of understanding the power that there is in people and the power that people have in self and the power that there is in women. And we also bring in our children. Women are not excluded because they have children. Women are not excluded because they don't have education. Women that have education bring in what they have, and they support this. And this is how we become one bunch where everybody brings in something and they contribute. It doesn't matter how much you know and or how less you know. Everybody knows something, and everyone, it's appreciated in our circle, in our moments.
Thank you, Alicia. That sounds great, honestly. I like the way you're saying that. Sounds like the floor is very open, leadership structure is very open, where no one feels above or below anyone. And an organization where you're saying for women, but you know, other genders are certainly invited and allowed to speak and share as well. But the core and the mission remains the same, and the leadership is open to all this. It's incredible. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Others. Oh, you know, I saw something in the chat, so let me just tap into that for a second. From Belkis, when I started working with the demographics, there's a significant disparity. Leadership tends to consist of a higher ethnic and socioeconomic group compared to the communities we serve, which often include less educated, low-income families. This imbalance creates a disparity that impacts the dynamics of power and decision-making, especially when considering factors like class, education, and economic status. And thank you, Lisa and Mary. Thank you for that, Belkis. Others, things that we saw, I think, in many cases, we'll see the difference in the community versus the leadership. I wonder if any of us have thoughts about why that is for leadership. As I'm reading this, I'm thinking of in leadership, is it a requirement almost to present a certain way if you want to get funding, right? If you want to get the executive director role, if you come from a grassroots organization that grows, do you need to present a certain way to the folks that help in your funding, the folks that handle the grant writing? Do you need that resume? Do you need that CV? Are there things that are already decided? Just in terms of if you want to be actually community and help, you have to be one way in a certain place. When we talked about the variability of power, right? Where I have to present differently in different spaces. Thank you, Jen. Jen says, I think that's true. Others, thoughts on our power maps? What did we see? Was it what we expected? Right? When you saw that, you're like, yeah, that kind of tracks us. That's what I've seen.
I can chime in. So I changed it up a little bit because my organization isn't formally part of a coalition. So I kind of did board for coalition leadership and staff for coalition members. But it was what I expected and similar to what Belkis said in terms of like, you know, as we go up, like the demographics got, you know, less diverse, had, you know, maybe more power. So I think like the communities we serve have kind of the highest stake in our work, but probably the lowest power. Diversity and representation kind of goes down as we go up the chart. So like staff and board have higher education, come from like higher class backgrounds in general, are less diverse in terms of several demographics. And something we've been aware of in the last couple of years, especially, is that the board and many of the staff really don't share experiences of the women we serve. So we work with a lot of women who have experienced homelessness, poverty, and a lot of the folks on the staff and board can't relate to that, haven't experienced those things. So we've started to try to explore like, how do we get some of our alumni kind of in a pipeline to where they might become board members, to try to diffuse some of that, to try to share decision making a bit more.
Thank you, Denise. I think that's an incredible point. About the differences in the folks at the top and the folks that are impacted by the mission. The conversation you just shared is one that I've been involved in with a nonprofit that I work with here in Boston. And the conversation is the folks that come in, it's sort of generational, where this nonprofit started with low income Irish and Italian youth in the 30s and 40s. And then over time that changed, and the demographic that we serve now are lower income Black, Hispanic, and Portuguese youth. And so our existing board, there's a lot of folks whose families came from the initial iteration, and they're still very dedicated to the mission of the organization, but they don't look like these kids, and beyond look like them, they haven't lived in the world where these young people live. And so the mission is valuable, their purpose is valuable, but what's the difference in saying, how do we raise money now? How do we actually connect with a newer demographic of young people? Are we the right ones to lead it? And then even in the pipeline, there's a hard part of like, I'm building a pipeline of newer alumni, but you feel the space of like, who am I to be the one opening the doors, right? Why do I hold the keys to the gates of power to let these certain people in to be on a board or to give voice, right? Shouldn't they have always had voice? So how do I, there's power in power sharing. I have the power to decide if I want to share with you. And so there is a struggle in that, in change, in saying, are we the ones that should have the voice anymore? Are we okay with letting go of the reins? And how do you enact this idea of power sharing and understanding what the community needs? And can the community be the one that makes all the decisions? And what does that look like across these power structures? Let me get to some things in the chat from Lance. The coalition leaders definitely have higher education. Most of the communities they represent or serve. One coordinator and I have higher social privilege, race, gender, education, class, but much lower social capital and networks than the immigrant CBO leaders. It's an interesting mix. Thank you. Denise saying, interesting, bring up social capital. I think so often communities we serve have more social capital, lived experience, which are both super important. And from Samara, I wonder if in power mapping, we need to be more explicit about powers related to white supremacy culture and how power is maintained in the US, especially upcoming federal changes and the ways related to things they usually are or done. Absolutely. Thank you, Samara. We can't escape thinking about white supremacy and the way it's impacted the US, the way it's impacted who we see as powerful, even as we talk about diversifying our leadership and changing the folks that have voice. Historically, we know that we are all impacted by bias. Do we respect the voice and the power of those who do not look like the old white male leaders, right? Do we react to them the same? Do we give them the same grace? They receive the same when they go in front of these systems of power? Because oftentimes when we elevate folks and they become the one or the two, we send them out as our voice without much of a support system. So what does that look like when we go through change and we ask folks to be the first to be the voice and send them out into these spaces? Liz, I see your hand. Thank you. And I thank you for the formality.
I have a few thoughts, and this could relate back to other things that we talked about, but these things have come into mind, sort of settling, I think, as we were talking about this mapping. One was with the power with the funder, and the sort of hoops that they make you go through that's not really congruent with the funding that they're providing. Like having to do a lot for $1,500, for example. And that sort of power over in that way. And the other thing you were mentioning about, the credentials and, people's, whatever that looks like. I was thinking in our work, we talk a lot about who's the best messenger. And I hadn't really considered the role of power in that. I mean, I look to what the research says about who's the best messenger for certain groups. but sometimes, like, especially in, say, substance use prevention, pediatricians or doctors are the best messenger. And why is that? And I think it's because of an authority and a power. But does that mean we shouldn't use those messengers if they're proven to be effective? And then my last thought was along the similar lines around sort of public health evidence or public health science, and what we look to towards implementation of evidence-based strategies, and what that, the power behind that, and sort of the placing strategies on a community rather than having something come from the community who serves. So those were just some other thoughts I had around power as we're talking.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you. Absolutely. Dora's point in the chat, noticed the resounding lack of diversity and language capacity amongst the leadership, and that's a very big disparity from the communities we serve, right? Again, our leadership having so many points of disconnection from the folks that they're to serve, and then Samara whiteness as the ultimate gatekeeper. And I say this, I know, perhaps not in this space, but generally in the communities and the conversations we have, when we say things like whiteness, when we say white privilege, and we talk about systemic racism, the understanding of what that means, that you cannot escape from the point that there was a time where in our policies, right, we talked about what is illegal and what is not. In our policies, whiteness was the ultimate indicator of power and voice. And the impact of that is not lessened by the law. It's not the historical impact of it has not yet been washed out by our new laws or our changes, right? That whiteness as the ultimate gatekeeper also stands right next to wealth as the ultimate gatekeeper. Because that idea of who was white and who got to own and who got to fund still impacts us today, right? How different would things be if the funders we went to, the folks we wrote the grants to, were Black, Hispanic, Asian? If there was a diaspora across our funders, right? If there was a difference in our leadership and who made the missions and the voice. And those are some of the things that we're talking about in terms of power. And being able to say this and speak to it and put in actual policy and change, and then stand on our policies and changes, not for, not to kind of get a headline or to see of the moment, but to understand the power and the mission of what we're doing. It's why we start with talking about our mission. I'll just give an example, Dorota. So, we had a lot of DEI initiatives that were put up 2020. And we are in 2024, and now on the other side of that, we've seen the rollback of those DEI initiatives. In that, I can say, we could probably say in one, the rollout of the DEI initiatives had no impact. They were for of the moment and for protection. And now the rollback of those initiatives, also for the same idea. But the ideas that are pushed out there have a reason and a mission behind them. We didn't actually put anything into policies and changing power, but we gave folks some things that seemed like platitudes, right? And we went to like hidden power, invisible power, setting agendas, and not having real policy change. So I think of that when we have these conversations. I know when we go into spaces, these things come up and these conversations get very heated and very elevated. And the explanation of what we're talking about when we're talking about power and policy and who's included and who gets voice and how do we serve our communities, no matter where we are, right? That we can speak frankly to folks about why we are where we are and what we're trying to do and staying focused on our mission. From Denise, how do you relate to your point about funders, Liz? Sometimes I think they really don't understand the power they have to make us jump through all the hoops. That's a great point. Do folks feel that the people that actually are able to really impact our mission, that they don't understand their own power, that they are in denial of their control of what's happening? Yeah. There's another level of disconnect there. Anything else? Are there any pieces of power and explorations of power in organizations that we didn't cover or we think missing a little bit? Obviously, the power map is not all encompassing. Are there spaces where we're missing pieces of power? I think one of paid versus unpaid employees. Places where when I ran programs, I made sure we never had an unpaid intern. If you show up here and work, you deserve to be compensated. It doesn't always work that way, but I always found the paid and unpaid to be an established expression of power that was needed to be sort of torn down. Salaried versus hourly, certainly. Thank you, Jen. Especially if your hourly staff doesn't get full benefits, right? Big piece on benefits and the additional pieces we add to folks in our workplaces. Anything else folks will bring up, or anything as we're thinking about our expression of power? I know sometimes when we go to trainings and we only have 3 hours together, a short period of time. To Lance's point, sometimes you gonna get these complaints first. We can get to solutions later, but I got to get some things off my chest. And we understand that, but we want folks to leave here with an idea of the assessment and the ability to review and see how power is playing out as a major step, even if it looks like complaining at first, and then we get to solutions, because solutions are going to take a very long time. Jen, I saw you. Go ahead.
Yeah, so this is just specific to my organization. So our board of directors, we're a affordable housing organization in Mission Hill in Boston, and our board of directors is all residents. So on the surface, that looks like the resident community has a lot of power. But what I see happen, well, one of the things that is happening is that there is like a push to like open up the board to folks who are not residents, and to kind of get that expertise in the board. And also sometimes the board also like has difficulty sharing power with the rest of the community. So we have an 11-member board that's a resident, but then they get to do everything themselves, and they don't kind of like include and power share with other residents.
I think that's, again, we're talking about existing ideas and systems. I think we all, you grow up and you think of, well, when I'm in charge, I'm in charge. I didn't get in charge to get everyone's opinion. I got in charge to be in charge. But that's not power sharing. Carol, I think our leadership is a good thing because the leader was one of them and started the program after you landed here. On the other hand, I don't know if that's true or not. Dora, some leadership members take feedback and criticism extremely personal, and they don't allow for the needle to move towards change. Absolutely. Dora, I think at that point, when folks often take challenge as an insult, people are not as open to feedback and input as we would like them to be. And when we say there are ways to be better, folks often take that initial piece as an insult or putting them down or saying they're not doing enough. When instead of thinking of us, this is a way for all of us to improve and be better and to see, really like take stake of what we're doing. What is the impact? Is it actually working? All right. Lisa, you want to share some best practices here on our last 15 minutes?
Yes. Okay, you can hear me. All right. So we've discussed these, and we can go to the next slide, Paula. So these have all been discussed. Oh, I'm quiet again. Can't hear me very well. How about now? Hello.
There you go.
Okay. This is going to be a very funny recording for anyone who watches the recording. All right. So what I want to say is these are some best practices you all have already brought up. You talked about participatory budget making, right? So determining how decisions will be made, right? So Boston is doing a participatory budget process. Is it clear to the people participating in it where they are going to be considered, consulted, advisory role, right? So I skipped ahead to bullet number 2, but for those of you who haven't heard of it, I encourage you to use a MOCA model in your coalitions. And perhaps, Winston, you could put that in the chat. It's from The management center uses it. They have a good, oh, too loud. Sorry. They have a very good explanation of the MOCA model. And so really want to talk to you, make sure that in your coalitions, it's clear who the decision maker is, who's the advised person. Sometimes we share power in this way of asking people for their opinions, right? We consult them, or, at least in our organization, we have for any youth jobs, we have youth or youth facing jobs, we have youth help us interview and give us their opinion on the person we're hiring. Now, what happens when we don't take their recommendation, right? We don't move ahead with that person for other reasons. So we have to be clear with our young people, you are part of this process, this is your role, so that it doesn't feel like fake power. Because ultimately, we knew from the beginning they weren't going to be the final decision makers. So we needed to make that clear. That's similar. I think the MOCA tool is really helpful with managing disagreements as well, right? Are you a consensus-based model for decision making, right? Is it always consensus, or is there one person who's ultimately going to decide? And often we have very different conflict management styles just from how we were brought up or what our values are. So that's a whole other piece of it. That would be a whole other training. I talked a little bit about authentic engagement, right? I think the MOCA tool is a good way to make clear how you are engaging people, for what purpose, and what their role will be. And if you are valuing lived experience, right? If we are valuing young people in the example that I just gave, maybe they should be the ultimate decision makers. Maybe we should share with them, well, we want to give you all the facts. This person wants a higher salary than our budget can handle. So do you still think we should move ahead with this person, right? That might be a different way of handling it, rather than saying, okay, you tell us what you think, and then the adults will go make the decision. So that's really valuing the lived experience of folks and ensuring that they have real power, not fake power. We talked a little bit about sharing knowledge and information, right? So how are we making information accessible, language accessibility, visual accessibility? Those are all really important pieces. And we don't, oftentimes, right, even that simple thing of start going into a meeting and feeling like you don't belong because people are using all of these acronyms that you have no idea what they're talking about. So when that happens to me, I kind of just tune out of the meeting. So even if my presence is important to someone, I don't feel like my presence is important because, right, that time has not been taken to explain what everyone else is talking about, that assumption. And again, because I have a lot of background working with youth, I think about this example of, I think one time we had a youth intern and we told them to CC us on whatever email they were sending, or BCC us. They had no idea what we were talking about. And that was just knowledge that we took for granted, right? And it was like, oh, why didn't they, include me on the email? So that was another really good point around just making sure that the things that we take for granted as like basic foundational knowledge, we are taking that for granted. So with the same way we kind of level set with Zoom, that would be another example. You want to model collaborative values and skills, and a way to do that is to do really a periodic review of, hey, how are things working here? Maybe do a 360 review of your own coalition, right? Like, I don't know how many of you do performance evaluations at this time of year. I'm currently under an avalanche of them myself. And you just want to think about, okay, how can we evaluate ourselves, and who can we use to evaluate us? And how do we get feedback in the right way? And how do we make it accessible to folks to give us feedback? So really looking at, again, that decision-making process, the systems and structures, the policies, and then thinking, okay, did we have the impact that we wanted to have? not quite. Okay, why? What do we need to look at again? The great thing about coalitions that we sometimes forget is collaboration, not competition, right? To move away from that scarcity mindset and scarcity of power too. It's not just scarcity of resources. It's, you know, this, where does power hoarding come from? It's the sense that there's a scarce resource, that it is a scarce resource. And if I share power, then that will make me less. That will give me less power, which is really not actually the case. And I think, is there anything else? Discussing and addressing. So we talked about that, right? Having very open conversations, acknowledging power, recognizing when we do and don't have power. I think back about Alexandria's example around spaces where she feels more or less powerful. And I led a training, you know, that I think is, you know, you all could do with your coalitions, an activity around identities. So like, I feel, you know, put all of the identities on a wall and say like, what I feel most powerful with this identity, right? And then you can give different scenarios and let people pick. It gives you a sense of that relational and situational power and how identities can play into that. I was not monitoring the chat, but I would love for you all to come off mute if folks have anything else to add. That was a lot of information before our last 6 minutes. So, and now I don't want to be the one to stand between people and lunch. So I will go over the last slide in 1 minute, which I think this is a slide a lot of you have probably seen. Specific instructions for the identity and power. I will have to find it. I mean, I have it in my head, but yes. So the continuum of community engagement, if we can look at that real quick, Paula. I don't know how many of you have seen different continuums. Thank you, Paula. There's a lot, you know, we have a continuum of youth participation. So just imagine these are different approaches that you would want to use, right? And I would say that it doesn't, inform is not always a bad thing, right? So all of these have a purpose and a place, right? Empowering is the gold standard, but it doesn't always mean that you're not going to be in the informing, right? There was at one point I had a director who wanted to do everything collaboratively, and it was great, but sometimes as like the group, we were like, okay, can we move this along? Can you just decide? We don't actually care about this thing, right? So you want to balance it a little bit. You don't want to, you know, sometimes being overly collaborative can lead people to kind of decision exhaustion. So I just want to offer this as the final framework for you all to use and consider, okay, where do I want to be based on the goal, right? Based on whatever my stated goal is in this moment, which of these items on the continuum do I need to use and what style am I going to employ? So with that said, while you all are wrapping up, I will, or actually Paula will make a quick announcement and share the feedback form for you all. We really appreciate your presence and your engagement. And I will also look at the chat.
So we really encourage everyone to fill out this evaluation. Tell us what, you know, what you liked, what else do you want to see, so that we can make this experience better for everyone. If you want to see any of our other trainings, please check out our website, hrainstitute.org, and check out our training library because we have a slew of YouTube videos that are recordings of our past trainings. So please check those out. Thank you so much for being here today, everyone. I hope you have a great day and happy holidays.